Hey, everybody, it's Nicholas Rogers with the Big Timber Lodge coming back at you live from the basement battle cabin in the beautiful state of Colorado. And boy, before we jump into tonight's live stream where we are talking about Colorado Civil Rights Era Reborn, I got to say, go Stars! I might bleed orange and blue for the Pigskids, but when it comes to the hockey, oh man, I'm a Stars fan through and through. So, yeah, Wolverines! All right, so we have some very special guests tonight. This is a first for the Big Timber Lodge on X America News, where we are bringing in multiple guests to talk about a very serious issue that's going on here in Colorado, and that's civil rights. So let's go ahead and introduce our first two guests, or our two guests tonight. So we have Mr. Kellen Lanier and also Michael. So, Michael, I'm going to go ahead and have you introduce yourself first.
I've been a resident of Colorado for a very, very, very long time. I was not born here. I was born in Selma, Alabama, pre-civil rights, before Martin Luther King marched there. So I've seen the good parts of Colorado and the good bad parts. And tonight's show, courtesy of Nick, is going to be on civil rights. My background is law. I've been in law enforcement for 32 years. So I've got a pretty good background on that.
All right, Michael, we're going to jump over to Kellen. Kellen, you are no stranger to the Big Timber Lodge. I believe this is your third or fourth time being on the stream. So, sir, we greatly appreciate you coming back on and for you to be able to drop some knowledge. But because we are on a nationally syndicated news network tonight, could you please go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yep. My name is Kellen Lanier. I still struggle with the introduction here. So I was on another show and they introduced me as a state political rabble rouser. So that's what I'm going to go with. I go and piss people off for the greater good. So thanks for having me back. And I'm really excited about the discussion today.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to the four-way screen. And I also brought in chat. So, hey, Wolverines. Michael, Kellen, I believe you're both familiar with all of the freedom fighters here in the state of Colorado that are signing up to testify, writing emails, and making plenty of phone calls and jumping on board with a class action civil rights lawsuit against the state. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this discussion with you guys, is because my chat is interested in the angle of how, you know, not only is the state violating in direct violation of our Second Amendment with SB 03, but there are civil rights violations going on. But before we actually jump to what those are, Michael, I know that you're very, very well versed in that, and I can't wait for you to share that information. Kellen, I just kind of want you to share with the folks, you know, the history of civil rights and why it's important for everybody to be familiar with it, and not just minorities from the United States, but everybody.
Yeah. So I think the overarching thought that we have to keep in mind when we're talking about civil rights here is that civil rights is more of a correction to government than anything else. So let's keep that context in mind. But just to give a history of civil rights, so that we can understand why now we're even saying that it's a civil rights issue. We're gonna zero in on civil rights as applied to 2A and a little bit of other civil rights here. So going all the way back. So 1791, the Bill of Rights was ratified. So that was the promise of liberty. But then it didn't apply to everybody else. It didn't apply to everybody, I should say. Rights. And then leaping forward a little bit, we have 1804, which was the Haitian Revolution. Why are we talking about another country? Because it had ripple effects in the U.S. and how the U.S. started to perceive people of color. It was terrifying to slaveholders. And so we had very early gun restrictions coming in. And keep that in mind. Fear reaction, where you're going to keep seeing this come up. Then skipping forward to the 1800s, 1865 through 1877, we have Reconstruction. This is, when Black Americans briefly regain rights, but then very briefly after that, the Black codes were introduced. We have some legislators in Colorado who that's their favorite time. Shout out to Javier Avery there. So And then we have 1875 through 1883. This is the Civil Rights Act. This is when the state, meaning the country, started saying, maybe we should do something about this, sort of. So it was passed and it was actually struck down by SCOTUS. And then Jim Crow era began after that. And then we have the Ocoee Massacre. That was huge because that came in 1920. Wow. And this is when, Black citizens tried to vote and then they were murdered for voting. So we had the legal system cover up that massacre. So now we have the vestiges or the blueprint for how to legislate violence into action and legitimize it with no consequences. That should strike true for a lot of people, and why I'm even going over that. And then skipping forward even more, the 1964 Civil Rights Act and all of those. So 1964 to 1968, that is, just think about that. That means that for me and my family, I'm the first generation in my family that was born with full civil rights. That's crazy. But we're going to keep on because during there we had the Black Panthers, Deacons for Defense, and some of the things that they did were later put into the modern schema for gun control. So 1967, the Mulford Act in California was a direct response to the Black Panthers in their smallest segment of action. They believed in self-defense, but they went up to the Capitol. It was framed as a storming of the Capitol. They went up to the Capitol. They didn't even know that a particular vote was happening that day. They got wind of it from a reporter. Reporters stormed the actual House floor there in California, and it was blamed on them. And then the Mulford Act was passed, boom, right after that.
Wow.
And then we're moving forward to the 80s and the 90s, the war on drugs, 94, the crime bill, that has implications now. And then moving forward to the 2020s, we have some of the things that maybe this crowd isn't so kind to, but it still is relevant of, Ferguson, some of the early Black rights movement or Black Lives Matter movement. I say that very carefully. I say the early part. And, all of the protests that were going on in 2020. And that's bringing us within 5 years of now. So that is my crash course in civil rights as applied to 2A. And a lot of this is going to be very, very important when we're talking about contextualizing why in the world we're talking about civil rights and guns.
Absolutely. And can you, before we jump in with Michael, thank you for being patient, but how can we tie in all of those instances to what's going on in Colorado from your perspective right now, Kellen?
Yep. Yeah. So if you think about the political drift that happened in Colorado, some of this, if we're tracing things back, California, what do we always say about California and Colorado? Don't California my Colorado. So these ideas, they drift, they're like a virus, and you can actually track them like a virus. So it's very important to know where these things come from, because now it's here in Colorado. Colorado is very sick because we have this virus of thinking that we're helping, when really, these politicians, what they're doing is reacting out of fear, and they're reacting out of protecting their sense of comfort. And we have actually reached a point where now they're reaching into a completely new demographic. They're reaching across demographics. Civil rights, as I was just talking about, has typically been a minority group. This is one of the first times we're really starting to transcend something like race. There still is classism in some of the bills that we're talking about.
Right.
but we're starting to widen that spectrum of the nanny state, of the, we know what's best for you, sit down and do as you're told. So what's happening is we're moving away from government that governs in order to protect, and we're moving into this we need to manage you sort of mindset. And that's what we saw in Colorado all this legislative session. I'm pretty sure they're planning still, with a few days left, to try and come up with some other way to manage people, to control. That's been the theme of this legislative session: control, control, control.
Yeah, and so I do want to bring in Michael on this topic right now, and this is actually outside of the Second Amendment, but more towards like First Amendment rights and parental rights, where we're seeing a heavy push for LGBTQ to be really pushed not only into the schools, in education systems, but also into the home, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but typically like Hispanic and African American households aren't nearly as, let's say, liberally progressive as the white folks that you might see up at the Capitol building pushing for this. And that could go against a lot of like family values for minorities. Am I right or wrong there?
I think you're right, Mike, because I think absolutely they're stepping across the line that's really starting to make people uncomfortable. It's not just one small segment. It's getting bigger than that now.
Right. And that's one of the things, I think one of the reasons why we saw Trump win in 2024 was because a lot of these, minority families and households go to church, right? And they have traditional values, and they're not for all this crazy stuff that we're starting to see from the liberal progressives here in Colorado following suit from the Californians. And I think that that's going to have major implications, or I hope it has major implications in this future election coming up in 2026 here in Colorado. But Kellen, do you mind if I jump over to Michael for a little bit? Because I want him to kind of start sharing some of his personal experience from his background, and also I do want to just touch on the history. So Michael, I'm going to pull up an image right now. You won't be able to see it on your screen, but it is an image of a Tuskegee Airman is who this is. And this is a Tuskegee Airman. And Michael, I would like you to explain who this person is.
Yes, that is my great uncle on my dad's side of the family. His name was Edward Creston Gleed. He fought in World War II, way pre-civil rights. You got to understand, blacks were fighting for a country that they really had no home. They were not wanted. They did want to fight for their country. So my dad's father was in the Navy during World War II, and his brother, my grandpa's brother, was in the Army. So for me, all of this going on has a direct smell of Jim Crow laws. I hate to say that. I am not here to open up old wounds of racism and all that. What we're talking about tonight is to show how civil rights is for everybody. Everybody. When you look at the civil rights laws on the book, it doesn't say black, it doesn't say white, it doesn't say blue, it doesn't say green. So for me, after wearing a uniform for 32 years of my life, it was very hard for me to swallow that, to have the state of Colorado bring forth laws that are direct descendant of the Jim Crow era. For 32 years of my career, I protected everybody's civil rights. I didn't look down on anybody, take their civil rights. And then all of a sudden, the state of Colorado goes, well, thank you for your time. We're going to take your civil rights. And I went, I don't think so.
Right.
So I had never, ever met Kellen before. I had never met you before until I watched the caucus where it was you, Ava, Teller County Sheriff, Spartan Defense, Rocky Mountain Gun Owners, and Senator Armagost. You guys were all talking, and I saw Kellen stand up. He asked a question, and then everything just flooded in on me really fast. I said, I wonder. So for me being born in Selma, Alabama, pre-civil rights, my birth certificate, this doesn't happen anymore. My birth certificate, because I was born in Selma in 1962, almost 2 years before Martin Luther King marched there. My mom went home to see her mother. She went into labor. Well, my birth certificate is part of that ugly time. It has my name, my dad, and my mom. And on that document, it shows race as being what? Colored. Okay. So you got to understand that was the era of black people couldn't drink from the same water fountain as white people. We had to ride at the back of the bus, right? Both of my parents met in Tuskegee pre-civil rights. Okay. Wow. So when this all came up, I reached out to you because I wanted to talk directly to Kellen. And it's been a pretty good match. Kellen, if you went just for a small second, you went over the issue, the uprising in Haiti. Could you talk about the Mulford bill and how that came about under Ronald Reagan and how the NRA got involved in that?
Yep. So with the Mulford Act, that was named after one of the primary senators. I forgot his name, but last name was Mulford. And so again, we had just a racially tumultuous time. So you had the Black Panthers who were still forming their identity. They had kind of resolved to be more than just guns, but they still had that core. And they were like, no, we are going to assert ourselves and say, no, you cannot just push us around. So one of the ways they did that was to do a protest at the Capitol with guns. That, of course, terrified those lawmakers. So a lot of those Democrats got together and they were like, we can't have this. And it was very interesting that this was one of the few times that the NRA came out against guns. So they had actually approached the NRA and the NRA is like, oh yeah, absolutely no. So you actually had Democrat, Republican, and NRA come together and pass that law. I think a lot of the Democrats here would be very proud of how fast they passed the law. Because they just blew through every single stop sign just to get this done, because they literally had Negroes with guns on the House floor. That didn't do anything to them. It just scared the ever-living crap out of them. So they're like, no, they can't have this. They're too scary. I would imagine that the logic was, with all of the things that we know have been done to them, if they are allowed to have power by force and politics, we're cooked. We have to do something.
Right.
So that's kind of how that Mulford Act came into being. It was a direct response. There's no other way to slice that. It wasn't like, oh, this was brewing, like things that we hear here. We talked to stakeholders and blah, blah, blah. No, it was, there are Negroes with guns here. Oh my God, run for the hills.
And so that's correct. And because the NRA has historically been pro-gun for blacks. I mean, anything that's been like try to restrict that civil right, they've been on the forefront to fight to make sure that civil right is held in place.
Which this does, Michael, this does bring up a good time to actually share, though, the Libertarian Institute article that you shared with me. I'd like to share that really quickly just with chat. Let me go to a discussion screen. So where is that? Right there. Discussion screen with screen share. So folks, this link, if you open up the video description on this YouTube channel, you will see the very one of the links that says the Libertarian Institute, and you can read an article. It's called Negroes with Guns, The Untold History of Black NRA Gun Clubs and the Civil Rights Movement. And it was written in 2019. And this is tying into some of the stuff that they were just speaking about. And it's a very, very good read to start to understand how minorities got their gun rights, but had to fight for it. And it's a great read. And there's actually a book that you could read as well. So let me jump back to my guest. All right. So Michael, I did share that article with everybody. You can hear me when I'm on the other screen, but they just can't hear you when I don't have you up. So Michael, could you talk a little bit about this article?
So that article, they did a really good job in that article showing the history and text of civil rights for blacks in regards to firearms. Okay. One of the best things that's in there is like Kellen was talking about, there's a Supreme Court decision from 1856 that's in there where a slave was fighting for his freedom and he lost in the Supreme Court, okay? And but the court stated basically because he was not white, he did not have the rights as a white person, okay? When I testified at the State House, I put the Second Amendment aside because as long as I can remember, the people that are anti-gun have always tried to separate the Second Amendment as not being a civil right. Okay. For us minorities, it is a civil right because we were not afforded the Constitution or our civil rights. Okay. So you can't say one thing of the Second Amendment is this and civil rights is that. No. It is a civil right because back in the day, if a Negro during slavery picked up a gun or during the times he wasn't supposed to have a gun, you were put to death during slavery. After that, Jim Crow, there were so many soldiers that came back from fighting in World War II. They did not like to see black men in uniform in the South because, you're pushing the authority, okay? And those men were lynched, beaten, whatever. The atrocities were horrendous, okay? So when you speak about the Second Amendment and people state these words in the anti-gun side, the government has the right to restrict your ownership of firearms. That is completely wrong. The day that we are born, those civil rights are afforded to everybody in this nation. Doesn't matter what skin color you are. Those are your civil rights, okay? Now, when you're born, doesn't mean you're going to get a driver's license, right? That's not part of our civil rights. So they're trying to pull a little part out of that, of how government oversight has a right to affect our civil rights. That's zero. What the government does have a right to, our state house, our senators, our representatives, is to make laws for people that are breaking the law, okay? So say you have somebody who uses a gun for robbing a bank. And if they were smart, they would say, okay, we're going to use a magnifier on that crime. You robbed the bank, this is what the charge is for bank robbery. But because you used a weapon, okay, it's aggravated robbery.
Right.
So we know what that charge is going to be. But because you had a weapon in possession, we're either going to do this. We're going to say, no good time. You're going to do straight time, like in the federal system. You will not get any parole. You're going to do full time.
Wow.
Okay. One of the things I learned over time was going through schools with the Department of Justice, through their AG's office. We were trying to put a dampening on the gang violence in Colorado and the drug dealing, was they had to find a way to stop the atrocities. I mean, during the 90s, the gang violence was off the chain here. The homicide rate was crazy. They came up with an idea of, you got a gun, we're putting a magnifier on that. You had drug dealers, before they would get caught, they knew they were going to get caught, they would throw the gun.
Right.
And say, I didn't have a gun in my possession, right? But to come after us, the law-abiding and our civil rights, they do not have the right to do that whatsoever. So Kellen, would you like to take it from there?
Yeah, because that's kind of where we're getting a great lesson on civil rights right now. But I think a lot of people are wondering, and you guys we've already discussed this, and I actually have the bill pulled up right now, SB 03. But people are wondering how civil rights is being infringed with SB 03, and that's what I really want you guys to explain.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, just looking at how all of this went down. So, civil rights, it's not, I think sometimes we think of this as like a left-leaning like slogan, but it's really more of like the unfinished business of the Constitution. So like when Black Americans demanded civil rights, we weren't really asking for more. We just like Michael was saying, we were just asking the country to finally mean what it said. So equal protection, due process, and liberty, all of that. And when we fast forward to SBO 3, what we hear is, but this is the law now. You have to. And I always contend that, well, Jim Crow was law.
Mm-hmm.
Poll taxes were law. Redlining was law. We get to this point of, okay, the Second Amendment was part of the Constitution. Some people hate it. Some people love it. That's a whole other can of worms of looking at the actual drafting of the Second Amendment and why it's worded so freaking weird, because these same conversations were being had then, which is why. So if you look at the original draft, it's flipped. So the right to bear, keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, being necessary, but then they flipped it, right? That was kind of a compromise between Federalists and everybody else. So what we're seeing in Colorado is these legislators trying to come up with like the interpretive dance version of the Second Amendment, like doing all of this weird stuff to calling out the militia, but then playing on the fact that we don't have it, and it's like little kids saying, "I have a shield for everything." But why is it a civil rights violation? Because you do have to go back to the Dred Scott decision, which has not been walked back. I don't know why they don't acknowledge that. It has not been walked back, and it acknowledges that these are civil rights for certain people, and the only reason we can't say for certain people is because of the 14th, the 13th, and 14th Amendment.
Right.
So why is it a civil rights issue? Because, well, oddly enough, because racism created this situation where it got to SCOTUS, and they had to make a decision. And they were like, no, this is, but just for certain people. That's still in place. So we talk about Heller, we talk about Bruin. You have to kind of throw in Dred Scott as well, because that sets the for whom. So now we have it that it is for the people. And Colorado is saying, well, yeah, but you have to be able to pass some test that we're going to keep moving the goalposts. Why? Because they kicked it to the AG. So there are so many issues that it's just more government overreach. And if you think about civil rights and civil rights protests, civil rights movements are always a reaction to government overreach. Mm-hmm. You are stepping on something, we need you to stop. We're not asking anymore. That's what civil rights is.
So, I mean, let's touch on something with like the Jim Crow era laws, where our government made, in certain states made tests for black people to have to pass in order to be able to vote. You had to get like a voting license, and you had to take this really crazy, stupid test that was not easy to pass if you could pass it at all. and it was ruled to be like unconstitutional. It was against their civil rights to have to do that, and that was eventually overturned. And that's directly where we're tying into the COID card, the Colorado Firearms Owner Identification Card, where they're saying you will have to take a test that the state will write and get 90% or better in order to be able to attain your card. And who knows what's going to be on there. We've already heard from one attorney that they are going to bring in sympathy courses that are going to be part of the training, and you're going to be tested on, which is going to be the same thing as if like you get a DUI in the state of Colorado, and in order to get your license back, you have to go through like sympathy training where they put mothers of children that passed away from drunk drivers, and they shame you for being a drunk driver. And when we talked to a lawyer, he said that's what they're going to be putting into this course as well. So that's going to be crazy if we get tested on something as subjective as that. That's not really an objective, study point. But also, who knows? I mean, saying that you have to get a 90% or better on a test to be able to exercise your civil rights is nuts. There were people that I went to boot camp with that could barely read. And I'm not saying that they were minorities. There were some white folks from the South that could barely read and write, but they were in boot camp. They got their GEDs by the skin of their teeth, and they could be there. Could they possibly get pass this test at 90% or better? I don't think so. I don't know what's going to be on the test, but it's crazy to think that you're going to have to get a higher score in order to just purchase a firearm in the state of Colorado than you have to get in order to conceal and carry. I don't know. Michael, what do you think?
You're absolutely right, because you got to look at the time frame that you're talking about for voting rights for blacks to vote back then. Okay, we were coming out of slavery. Jim Crow was highly in effect, and there was no education, right? Our education came from reading a Bible, if we were allowed to do that on the plantation, because you could be disciplined for attempting to learn how to read and being a minority back then. So what the state of Colorado is doing, it's like I said, it's sad, because when they start doing what they're doing, it's like they've totally forgotten the history. They've forgotten the history in the text, not just of the United States in general, but they've forgotten the history and text of this state. When I testified and I said, which was all truthful, everything I said was truthful. And I said, our state house, you were not in politics under that gold dome back in the day unless you were part of the Ku Klux Klan. That was the way it was in Colorado, period. Okay, period. We've had city streets of Denver named after Klan members that were politicians. The airport, okay? I'm not trying to open up old wounds, but the truth has got to come to a point to where it works in our favor, okay? And what really upsets me is when Walker Stapleton was running for governor against Jared Polis. Jared Polis used Walker Stapleton's great-grandfather or grandfather, who was part of the Ku Klux Klan, to fight Walker Stapleton making it to the governor. There was commercials all over the TV, right?
I remember that.
That awoke East Denver. They came out and voted for masses for Jared Polis. And then after that, you had the Stapleton community, a high-end community. They wanted to change their name now from Stapleton, which is now Central Park, right? And then they took down all the signs for anybody that had a name that was part of the Ku Klux Klan. So we can't bury our history, but how dare them use Jim Crow era stuff against us?
Right.
If you look at the nature of our state in general, we were free to buy anything we want within firearms until what year? 2013. Is that right?
Right.
When the magazine ban came about. It's been a full-on assault now. We went from Nick's instant check to where you go in, buy a gun, wait 5 minutes. If they're busy at CBI, 20 minutes. I know some good people work at CBI, right? Now it's 3 days. And the thing they're using is exactly what I testified to in the State House. They're using health and public safety. Ku Klux Klan used the same thing. They termed public safety. Okay? Public safety does not give you the authority to take my civil right from me. Any of my civil rights from me. Zero.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And I think that us as gun owners, the shoe is on the other foot now. And before I go into that, Kellen, do you have anything else you'd like to say before I start down that road?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo that because that's what we keep hearing, right? And that's where, if you follow the money, it's in public safety and health. They're calling it all of these things. So they're calling this what do I always hear? A necessary step, to limit this uniquely lethal epidemic, right? They probably focus group that into oblivion. But I just look at this and I just see old tricks and new rapping.
Right.
Right. So it's just laws written in the language of protection, and it's enforced through the threat of punishment. And I mean that very literally. That is not hyperbole. If you look at Chad Clifford, he straight up said, if you try to push back against the government, I will shoot you. He said that. So there's the threat of punishment.
Right.
But I'm just like, wow, I've read this script before. I remember sitting with my grandfather and him telling me this type of stuff, and it's just back. Back then it was called Reconstruction backlash, right? It was the black codes. And when I look at lawmakers in 2025 citing 1800 statutes to justify disarmament, I don't even see progress.
Right. So yeah, that's something that I wanted to touch on really quickly for those that aren't aware of this situation. So Colorado, as Michael mentioned, has been steeped in racism for a century. And that's why Spike Lee made a movie called The Black Klansman, which was based here in Colorado, and it's based on a true story. And as Michael mentioned, you used to not get into politics in Colorado unless you were part of the Klan. And I remember even the college that I went to out in Gunnison, Colorado, at Western State, there was a hill on the backside of the college campus, and if you walked up there, there was remains of burnt crosses from when they used to burn crosses over the college because they allowed Negroes to come to school. And so the state is really steeped in racism, and yet they champion themselves as being this like liberal, progressive utopia, and yet we still have Democrat politicians quoting late 1800s racist law as being a good reason to prevent us from being able to own firearms. They literally are quoting that. Kellen, can you just dive into that just a little bit so people understand what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I see this all as a reset more than anything else, right? So like Michael was saying, this is just repeating. So we had Javier Mabry come out and say, well, hey, look at this in Georgia. This is Colorado, but he said citing Georgia. In the 1800s, that law, it was about, black people. It was kind of like the prototype for the Mulford Act, right? So black people did something that came out with the law, like immediately. And then he quotes it. Then we have the history that we have yet to grapple with in our own state of that Klan affiliation that Michael was talking about. So how is any person supposed to reconcile that? How are they supposed to accept that this is for your safety when we historically have had the Good Old Boys Club here in Colorado? And then you had to walk that line and you had to hold those beliefs. And then we're supposedly reformed now, still citing the same stuff.
Absolutely. And I do want to just touch on the fact that part of the amendment that actually holds a lot of racist undertones and a lot of civil right infractions includes the Colorado Firearm Owner Identification Card, which we found out was an amendment put in by Everytown for Gun Safety, who actually authored SB 03. And the original author for the bill, we found out through that Wall Street Journal article that you were interviewed in, was Allison Shy, who works for Everytown for Gun Safety. But guess where she's from? She's from Chicago, Illinois, the birthplace of the FOID card, the Firearm Owner Identification Card, which was introduced to stop black people from being able to purchase firearms because they did not want black activists to be able to stand up for their rights in the state of Illinois. And they introduced in the 1960s the FOID card. And guess what? That's what, Allison Shai thought would be great for Colorado. Let's introduce the same card system that's even more strict with more racist undertones into Colorado. I don't know. It just blows me away.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think ultimately it's tone deaf. Allison, she was doing what she thought was right, but the issue that I keep I can't get over is that this is not Illinois.
Right.
This is Colorado. She should stay in Illinois and do those Illinois things in Illinois. If we want to be a state, then we need to listen to the people within literally the four corners, the four walls of this state, as far as when it comes to what we want. And that's what we did not get. We had zero agency in this, and we had threats about, threats to our agency in life should we not toe this line. And that's when I think for a lot of us, the gloves come off.
All right. Okay. So, Michael, you had an interesting conversation. Do you want to share it with the agent that you spoke with, and a little bit about that conversation? Because I do have the FBI, what we investigate under federal civil rights. Before I share this document, I would like you to, if you would like to share that conversation.
Okay, so what happened with me is that when all this came together for me and my heritage started talking to me, I said, I know for a fact there's two parts of the criminal justice code for civil rights. There's the civil part and there's the criminal part. There's two different parts to the civil rights code. I know because of what happened during civil rights that there's a time where the federal government steps in on our behalf. Okay. It doesn't matter if it's doesn't matter whatsoever. There's a trigger that is pulled to activate the DOJ. So after I watched your caucus, when I first saw you guys on your YouTube channel, I started doing my research. When I finished doing my research, I came up with two laws that are criminal laws. We're talking about not something that's going to go for like a class action civil rights lawsuit once this 003 goes into effect. The first one I read at my testimony at the State House, and I love it. They did went above their head. They didn't care, but the Republicans that were sitting on that bench were looking at the Democrats and looking at me, and those Republicans were like, we believe what this guy's talking about has got to be the truth. The Democrats on the panel didn't care. So
let me know.
What I turned around and did is when I got done doing my research, I reached out to verify whether or not this law was still an active law on the books as a criminal law for the DOJ. I ended up calling the FBI and I spoke with them at length. They had never heard of this law whatsoever. The agent I spoke to had to look it up. And when she ended up looking it up, first words out of her mouth was, "Oh my God." Mm. And I said, okay, so who is going to be activated to do the investigation on our behalf for this? She goes, well, this is going to have to go to the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ, and it's going to be a civil suit. I said, where are you getting that from? I said, please continue reading the law. She got down to the bottom of the law, and there is the punishment for violating these laws. So it's a criminal act. There is no civil suit. So what I ended up doing, I'm not going to go into the details of what my case is about, because everybody in the state of Colorado has the right to do this. And this is paramount for what's going on for us to put a stop to what these people are doing to us. Nicholas, could you bring up the first one?
Yes, sir. Let me bring it up right now. All right. So we're talking about the FBI federal civil rights statutes.
Yes, please
right.
Bring that up.
Let me go ahead and bring that up so you could talk to it really quick with a screen share.
I want to see Title 18 USC Section 241, Conspiracy Against Rights.
Okay, hold on really quick. Where's my screen capture? There we go. Add source, screen capture. Okay. There it is. Done. Okay. All right. Go ahead and talk. Where did you want to go?
We're going to look at Title 18 USC Section 241, Conspiracy Against Rights.
Okay, right there. I'm on it.
Okay. So what this is, this statute makes it unlawful for two or more persons to conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person of any state, territory, or district in the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him or her by the Constitution or the laws of the United States, or because of his or her having exercised the same. Okay.
Okay. That's pretty powerful.
That's very powerful. There's three components to that. The third one is that further, it makes it unlawful for two or more persons to go in disguise on the highway or on the premises of another with the intent to prevent or hinder his or her free exercise or enjoyment of any rights so secured. And then the third, punishment varies from a fine or imprisonment up to 10 years or both. And if death results or if such acts include kidnapping or an attempt to kidnap, aggravated sexual abuse or an attempt to commit aggravated sexual abuse or an attempt to kill, shall be fined underneath this title or imprisoned for any term of years or for life or may be sentenced to death.
Wow.
Okay. So do you see anything in there that says about the Second Amendment? Second Amendment is what? It's a civil right. That's our civil right. That civil right, as my black people, was not afforded to us. So this big discussion, as Kelly and I were talking about earlier, okay, this law pertains to everybody in the state of Colorado that is a gun owner that's going to be affected by the laws of the state. And that means everything that they have passed. The bills for outlawing 18 to 20-year-olds to buy weapons, ammunition, 3-day waiting periods, all the stuff that we were free to do per our civil right. Okay? These people are conspiring. This could be these people can be charged with this crime. That can be any state house rep, any state house senator, the governor, any gun control organization, every town for gun safety, their sub-organizations, anybody, okay? Because you're having these people get together to do what? They're doing the same thing that the Ku Klux Klan used to do. These laws were drafted, so what happened during the Civil Rights era and the Jim Crow era would never, ever happen again. And for some reason, the State House of Colorado thought it would be an okay idea to resurrect Jim Crow gun laws. And the way they're doing it is the same way the Ku Klux Klan back in the day, trying to get their policies and their beliefs put into law to keep Negroes from having the same rights as whites, okay? They would give money to their political organization. They would help them run their campaigns. They would do all of this stuff. It's the exact same thing that happened in the past that is happening in the future, okay? So that's the first one. The second one is Title 18 USC Section 242.
Let me go back to that screen really quick. So at 242, we're on that right here. Let me expand this.
Title 18 USC Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. So this goes towards our elected officials. So because of the history and the text of this state, they can't say, whoopsie, we didn't know. So there's this thing called qualified immunity. Politicians use it all the time when they end up destroying your civil rights or whatever. The first thing that comes out of their mouth was, they come up with the excuse of, I did not know. State of Colorado, you can't say that. It's in the history and the text of this state. So this law states, this statute makes it a crime for any person acting under color of law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom to willfully deprive or cause to be deprived from any person those rights, privileges, or immunities secured or protected by the Constitution and laws of the United States.
Mm.
This law further prohibits a person acting under color of law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom to willfully subject or cause to be subjected any person to different punishments, pains, or penalties than those prescribed for punishment of citizens on account of such persons being an alien or by reason of his or her or color of race. Acts under color of any law include acts not only done by federal, state, or local officials within the bounds or limits of their lawful authority, but also acts done without and beyond the bounds of their lawful authority, provided that in order for lawful acts of any official to be done under color of any law, the unlawful acts must be done while such official is purporting or pretending to act in the performance of his or her official duties. This definition includes, in addition to law enforcement officials, individuals such as mayors, council persons, judges, nursing home proprietors, security guards, etc., persons who are bound by law, statute, ordinance, or customs. Punishment varies from a fine or imprisonment of 1 year or both, and if bodily injury results or such acts include the use, attempted use, or threatened use of a dangerous weapon, explosives, or fire, shall be fined or imprisoned up to 10 years or both. And if death results or such acts, including kidnapping or an attempt to kidnap, aggravated sexual abuse, or an attempt to commit aggravated sexual abuse, or an attempt to kill, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for a term of years, or for life, or both, or may be sentenced to death.
Wow.
So both of these laws are pretty black and white when it comes to them trying to restrict my civil rights. They have no leg to stand on. And the sad part about this, I believe that some of our Republican senators and reps actually are reviewing this.
Really?
Because I believe I saw one of them make reference to this. They're actually reviewing what came out of my mouth. Now, I would not be saying this if I did not know what I'm talking about. Okay? So when I talked to the FBI agent and she finished reading the whole statute for Title 18 U.S.C. Section 241, I asked her again. I said, so when is the trigger pulled and when is the federal government coming to our aid?
Right.
She goes, it will not be us. It has to be the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ. I said, do they have a criminal investigator?
What did
She
they
goes,
say?
yes, they do. So what I did is I went ahead and I filed a criminal complaint directly to Pam Bondi. I'm not going to tell you who I filed it against, but I did. Okay. And 2 days after I filed that criminal complaint is when Pam Bondi came out with the DOJ going into California to look at civil rights violations on behalf of 2 citizens of California. Okay. So there is no question whatsoever. This is a civil rights violation.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen now is that anybody within this state has the right to do that. And so go ahead, Nicholas.
Yeah, no, I was going to say your conversation kind of with the FBI is kind of how my conversation with the Department of Justice when I was in D.C. and I called Pam Bondi's office and they said, well, you can't talk to Pam directly, but you could talk to the Assistant Attorney General's office, and had them literally just like review SB 25003, and the person said, you need to file a civil rights grievance, and then literally put me directly in contact with the Civil Rights Department. Because I explained to him, I said, this is directly attacking the poor and the underprivileged and the undereducated, and it's going to be a block. It's going to be gatekeeping to make it so only the wealthy and educated can afford to exercise their civil rights. But also, we are running a little short on time, but I want to bring up, I have on the screen right now the PDF document. So this is also going to be in the video description as well. And I want you to walk us through this PDF document really quickly.
So this document's pretty self-explanatory. You're putting your name and your address, your phone number and everything. And then you're going to the columns to the right where it says person or entity you're filing a complaint about. That's when you're going to fill in their information. You're then going to scroll down, okay? And it's going to say, which one of these does this apply to? And you're going to put other, okay? And for other, for me, I put Jim Crow laws on mine. No, I take that back. I put down Title 18 USC Section 241 is what I put in on mine, okay?
Okay.
That's what you're going to do. You're then going to go to the second page, and then it says, what do you believe in what do you believe in is the basis for the discrimination you described in this complaint? You're going to check other, and you're going to put Jim Crow laws, okay? Because these are a direct representation of Jim Crow laws that they've reactivated to bring here, okay? And then after that, you're going to write in detail, how do these gun laws affect you? So for anybody that used to go to the gun store and buy a gun, and we were free to do so, and now they're taking that right from you, they're taking your 30-round magazines, everything that we were free to do under the term of health and public safety. Yeah, well, like I said, the Ku Klux Klan played that hand also. So you're going to complete that. You're going to fill it completely out, and you can use a second page if you want that you're going to have to print like in Microsoft Word.
Okay.
Type on that. When you're done with that, you're then going to go ahead and on the next page, which is page 3 of 4, you're going to say, do you believe that the violation of civil rights described in this complaint is part of a larger pattern of discrimination by the person or entity you named in this complaint? You're going to check yes. Then you're going to say, it says, if yes, please identify other people or groups that you believe may have experienced the same or similar discrimination by the persons or entity, include contact information available. I just put in all legal firearm owners.
Okay.
Are you represented by an attorney? No. Have you filed a lawsuit for issues described in this complaint? No. Have you filed a complaint about these issues with any other federal, state, or government agency? No. Did a person, office, or agency refer you to our office? Yes. FBI field office in Denver, Colorado. Okay. So when you're done filling that out, do not send this document to the Denver DOJ office. I gave them a week in the Civil Rights Division to call me back after I left a voicemail. They never called me back. I packaged it up, sent it registered mail directly to Pam Bondi so that she could so she could redistribute it down to the Civil Rights Division. And who took over the Civil Rights Division? Who was appointed, guys?
Yeah. She's actually a 2A champion too. I don't know how to pronounce her name. Harit. I can't pronounce her name, but her last name. But yeah, no, I'm excited about that. So, hey, I do want to share with the chat really quick. If you're watching this and you're on YouTube, I did add all of the links that you need to the video description. So if you go to the Big Timber Lodge YouTube channel and you pull up the Colorado Civil Rights Era Reborn live stream, or if you're there right now and you expand the video description, we're going to get into Mountain State Civil Rights Watch really quickly with Kellen, but also here's that civil rights complaint form that we just went over with Michael, as well as the FBI civil rights document that you can use to reference in those sections that we were looking at with section 241 as well as 242. So don't forget that that's there. And then also we have the Libertarian Institute article about Negroes with Guns, the untold history of black NRA gun clubs and the civil rights movement. So, Michael, I appreciate everything that you've done. We're going to jump back over to Kellen really quickly. So, Kellen, you could talk about what you got going on, especially with Mountain State Civil Rights Watch, because we only have a couple of minutes left, boss.
All right. Yeah, I'll make it quick. So, Mountain State Civil Rights Watch is just that. So it is something that is built to watch and track the civil rights here locally in Colorado. And why that's so important is because what I saw during this legislative session and the last one is complacency. Complacency is the currency that these politicians use to take your rights away. And, my message for everybody is just that every civil rights gain in this country and even in this state came from people breaking laws written to keep them in place. So, we always hear this, but it's the law sort of thing. So what I return is, if legality is your moral compass, then you probably would have jailed Harriet Tubman too.
Right.
So, but it's there so that people can see what's going on, to see how you're getting duped.
Yeah.
What we're working on there, the civil score doesn't have anything yet since we're nearing the end of the legislative session.
Right.
But this is an algorithm that I've been developing to track civil rights, bills that affect civil rights and how they affect them and what you can do about them. And I don't want to give away too much of the secret sauce, but it's going to start, earlier I called it a virus, right? So I have some technology to start tracking the spread of that, to see how it's going, so we can move a lot smarter and not just be, as I always say, meatheads, just going bashing people over the head and just seeing what comes out. So I think we do need to get more surgical, and that's what Mountain State is about. It's about surgical, just looking directly at something, its origins, its influences, and giving us the tools to dismantle it, because we're beyond marches here.
Yeah.
And there are other forms of force that we can apply. This isn't going up and, scaring people. This is about popping people in the mouth where it counts, sort of thing.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm very excited for this Mountain State Civil Rights Watch, website and organization to be stood up, because it is more than just 2A civil rights that are being trampled on in Colorado. And there's a lot of stuff that we need to keep our eyes on. They had 500 bills that they introduced this year, this legislative session, and I guarantee over half of them were probably infracting on our civil rights in some way or another. So you have a lot of work to do with this, but I do want to also just ask too, can people support you with the Mountain State Civil Rights Watch, and how do they do that?
Yes. So I think last time we talked, it was like a really janky looking website. I'm like, we're going to work on it. We're going to work on it. We worked on it. So there's a contact form there. I will get the email now. So if you send contact, I will get it. It will buzz my phone here. You can also support monetarily. There have been some people that are contributing. And frankly, that's why it took so long to get this website. But those contributions created the version 2 of this website. So, from here, it's getting to the back end work, the tech side of things, where we're really going to make a difference. We have different tools now. Civil rights, it's an ever evolving thing. So we're moving to technology to advocate and help advocate. So those are the 2 ways you can help us out.
Awesome.
And yeah.
What exactly? All right, and just so people understand what they're getting if they decide to either donate their time and they donate their money, what exactly are they getting from this?
So to be kind of tongue in cheek, freedom, right? Yeah. So that's really what we want. We want liberty. Yeah. But what are they getting specifically from Mountain State? We want to be able to develop tools for accountability. So we want to create a completely, a tool that completely sidesteps some of the tools that they use to create opaque, policy, to be able to trace that back. So that's one. And then being able to have teeth to that as well. So we're not just sitting here snitching saying, hey, look at such and such doing this. We're actually going to then track how egregious those things are and go after the worst of those.
Gotcha. And we could potentially then, it'll be like having the receipts, having a score, a metric score, a quantifiable metric score that we can then present to people like the Department of Justice and say, hey, this is what's going on in Colorado. We have the proof. These are the bills and the laws that we're facing. Michael, also, Kellen, I appreciate all that. But Michael, I do want to jump back over to the form that we just talked about filling in. Do you have to be black, though? And this is a question that people are going to be asking, to put, Title 18, Section 241 on the first section, or to be able to put Jim Crow laws. Do you have to be black in order to put this in?
No, you do not. What you're doing is, like I said, when I did my probable cause, is basically a story to activate the history of the civil rights and our gun rights. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This law pertains to everybody in America that is a U.S. citizen, those rights that are afforded to us at birth. When you submit this document directly to Pam Bondi to give to Harmeet Dillon, who is the attorney for the Civil Rights Division, it gives them firepower. They look exactly at what criminal law, not civil, criminal law to enact to open up a criminal investigation. Okay. We can do that now. We don't have to wait until 003 goes into effect. And I'm telling everybody that.
Okay.
Your power, your right. We're not here to shake hands anymore. We're not here to negotiate anymore. I'm not going to take you out to lunch. I'm not going to come visit you in your office. You treaded down this road. I'm going to make sure this never, ever happens again in this state.
Okay. Let me.
Also, so one last thing.
Yeah.
There's other people that have reached out to me. I'm not going to tell you what state. They're doing the same thing there. Because
really?
Nobody knows. Yeah, I'm serious about this. Nobody knows about these two laws. Nobody. What do they always do? We'll see you in the court. It'll be a civil suit. Not this time. It won't.
Huh. Wow. So where in this bill or in this PDF document do we say what individuals we want to go after for violating our rights here in Colorado?
You can put it on the front page. So where your information goes, okay, you can fill out as many of these as you want. And like if you want to do it against every state house rep and senator who put their name on that document for every gun control law, you can fill out one for each and every person.
Okay.
You can submit it. You just have to make sure the probable cause shows how they are violating your civil rights. And that's where it comes into. I used to be able to go in the gun store, buy anything I wanted to buy with no restrictions.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And this, like I said, this thing of public health and public safety, and that's not going to fly anymore.
Okay.
Like I said, if they had been smart, they would have worked on laws to go against criminals, not us.
Wow. That's
not us.
Okay. All right. And don't forget to include Title 18 USC Section 241, Conspiracy Against Rights, and also Title 18 USC Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under color of law. Boy, I would like to see some of the maximum sentencing possible with these politicians here in Colorado that are doing this, knowing that they're directly violating our rights. But folks, we are 7 minutes over. This has been a fantastic. This has been an awesome live stream, guys. I greatly appreciate you coming on. Kellen, you're always welcome. And Michael, if you would come back on in the future and we could talk more about this, because I know a lot of people are going to have a lot of questions about should we be doing this as a class action? Should we be bundling this? Should we each be sending this individually? Who exactly are we sending it to at the Department of Justice? I get the fact that it's going to Pam Bondi, but there's going to be a lot of questions. And I would love to have you guys on here in the near future so we can answer those questions. And thank you guys for the civics lessons. Thank you for the history lesson, because if you do not know your history, you are doomed to repeat it. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. And instead of them just targeting a race of people, they are targeting a class and a wealth class, an education class, a literacy class of people with these laws. And then not only that, but as you mentioned before, civil rights laws, even if they were developed for the minorities, for the blacks that did not have constitutional rights at first, and the civil rights gave them those, they still apply to everybody. And that's why I brought up the fact that you can put down Title 18, you can put in Jim Crow law, because those things affect you too, even if you're Korean. I see we had Landlocked Yoda's in here. He's Korean, right? He could put that in there. So just make sure everybody knows that. So guys, do you have anything to close out with in the next minute or so?
Bury your fangs, guys. Bury your fangs and file a criminal complaint.
All right.
And I would just say, it's not the time to sit there and just hope for the best. In Colorado, most people, they don't hate injustice. They hate discomfort. So, that's why they're always asking us for peace when we ask for change. So, like Michael said, bury your fangs and let's get ready to rock.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. You guys rock. And let me go ahead and just say goodnight to everybody. And go Dallas Stars. I know there's a lot of Avs fans out here. But, but anyways, Wolverines and college.